1 minute and 14 seconds before I finished my sermon last week, we arrived at the 2-day point of this series through 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And you say, the 2-day point. The 2-day point is that point where I have now preached for 48 hours through this sermon series. It's been 48 hours, 1 minute, and 14 seconds. 15, 16, 17. But who's counting? Now, I say that to you because it seems appropriate that we should come to that particular moment where it's been 2 whole days of you having to sit through this. Because we come this morning to what I think is probably going to be, all right, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. This is going to be the most difficult verse to handle across the 2 days we've been working on this, all right? And I don't mean difficult in the sense of trying to figure it out. I mean difficult in trying to apply it, all right? So here we go. We have been working our way through 2nd John, which is an epistle. 1st John was more of a sermon, probably, that was then written down in the form of a letter and sent around. But 2nd John is much more specific as being an epistle. It's written by John to the elect lady and her children. Again, we can agree to disagree over what that means, but it's written to a group of believers in some way. And John writes specifically a thesis, and his thesis is found in verse 5, that we love one another. Okay, we are to love one another. And we are to do this, John tells us, because of 3 great truth claims that he then puts before us from verses 6 down. The first of those truth claims is that the believer, those of us who claim Christ as our Savior, is called to walk a unique path from the ways of the world. We are not to walk in the paths the world walks in. We are to walk in a very different way from the rest of the world. The call to faith in Christ is not a call to add something to your existing life. It is a call to a new path entirely. The second truth claim then that John brings is that there will be, unfortunately, there will be deceivers who will try to sway you from that path. There will be those who are set in motion by the father of lies himself to try to disorient you from that path, try to get you off that path, try to get you going someplace else. Or more specifically, I would argue, back onto the path that everybody else is on, rather than the path you're supposed to be on. And the third truth claim that goes with it then sums it up by suggesting that the believer needs to be aware then of what's going on around them. As we looked at last week, John says, watch yourself. Be aware. Look beyond the face. Look beyond what you think you see to see what you really ought to see. So those 3 truth claims John puts behind this statement that we are to love one another. And this is the reason why we are to love one another. We are to walk a different path. Yes, there will be deceivers to try to get us off that path. So we're to watch. We're to be careful. We're to look. We're to be observant. We're to be clear that we understand what's going on in attempting to walk that path. Now, how many of you noticed that I skipped verse 9? Anybody? Anybody? A few of you are nodding your heads. I preached verse 8 last week, did I not? But your bulletin starts in verse 10. What happened to verse 9? Well, it's still here. I'm going to use it as a bridge from the indicatives of this letter to its imperative. Because I think that's what verse 9 is. I think verse 9 is John's way of summarizing the 3 great indicatives that he's just given to get himself a nice running start into the imperatives. It's a bridge. It's technically a part of the 3rd truth claim about being aware of what's going on, but I'm going to preach it as a bridge. So as we move through the systematic exposition of the letter, verse 9 gets us to the imperative by completing the thought. So it's really hard to say, does it belong in last week's sermon or does it belong in this week's? Well, I'm putting it in this week's just to make it simple. In verse 9, John says this. He says, everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. Everyone who. All right, so notice how inclusive that is. Everyone who. And he's making a target. Now, I'm convinced that John is simply, as I said, bridging between his indicatives and his imperatives by suggesting that the targets of the deceivers are these, those who go on ahead. I did wrestle with this quite a bit over the course of this week. Is he referring to the deceivers themselves, or is he referring to the targets of the deceivers? And I think he's referring to the targets of the deceivers. Up in verse 7, those who go out into the world and attempt to get us off the path. In this case, then, I think John is talking about those who fail to watch themselves. Verse 8. So verse 8 comes into verse 9. If you fail to watch yourself, watch out. Okay, here's what's going to happen. Here's what's going to become. You're going to run on ahead. John could be describing the deceivers here, but the context suggests that this is actually John referring to the targets of their deception. Those who are being targeted for deception by the deceivers. In other words, those who, having been deceived themselves, actually sabotage the walk of others in the commandments of Christ. Or, put it like this, those who become deceivers after having been deceived. Because this thing propagates itself, right? The deceivers deceive, and the deceived then become deceivers. They go out into the world and they continue to deceive. Okay, so John is making reference, I think, here to those who the deceivers target, and then they themselves become deceivers. And he says that they go on ahead. Everyone who goes on ahead. That phrase, who goes on ahead, is a single word in the Greek, proago. It's a single word. Now, in the simplest sense, this word is fairly easy to understand. It's simply to go before something, okay, or to go prior to it, or to go in front of it, or to lead forward. Literally, it means to walk ahead of somebody. Okay, literally it means to walk ahead of somebody. It's the same word used in Mark chapter 10, verse 32, where it says that Jesus and his disciples were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was proago. He was walking ahead of them. They were trailing behind him. He was going in a direction, and they were following him. It says they were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. And he turns around and explains to them why he's going to Jerusalem and what's going to happen when he gets there. So he's going on ahead of them. That's the simplest understanding. So I think John chose this word because it has that meaning of going on ahead of somebody at its core. Someone who takes the lead in something. Someone who gets out in front of others. By definition, a leader is someone at the front, right? A leader is someone who's leading. He's out in front of others. He is the one who's charting the course. He's going the path. Now, I know many times the leader isn't necessarily physically in front of everyone else, but he is in terms of his thought processes and his planning and his strategies and everything else. He's in front of those who are going in that direction. So a leader is someone that others follow. By definition, right? By definition. A leader is someone who charts the course. He's at the head of the column. He's at the head of the class. He's at the head of the team. He's at the head of the group. He's at the head of whatever you want to talk about. He's the leader because he's the one in front. Jesus was clearly the leader. He was walking ahead of his disciples. That was not just something that Jesus was doing to make a point. It was part of the fact that he was their leader. They followed him. He went, they followed him. It's interesting, isn't it, that in the New Testament, Christians are called followers of Christ because we follow him. He is the head. He is the leader. We follow after him. So Jesus walking ahead of them, leading the disciples into Jerusalem so that he and they can face the pinnacle of his ministry and its necessary consequences. He takes them where they need to go. He doesn't just say to them, okay, here's what the deal. I'm going to go to Jerusalem and be crucified. You just stay out here in Jericho and just kind of hang around. And then when I rise, I'll come back and get you. He doesn't say that. No, he takes them with him into that place. He wants them to go there because he wants them to experience not only what he's going to experience, but to be a part of it. So they can be witnesses to the resurrection, and they can be witnesses to the crucifixion, and they can be a part of what he is doing. He is leading them. So the word proago starts with this simple meaning of going on ahead. Everyone who goes ahead, everyone who takes the lead. All right? Now, again, in this case, it's in a negative sense. So the simplest definition is someone who goes on ahead, but there's a more nuanced definition. And the lexicon here specifically notes 2 John 9 as the verse in which this particular definition is probably being used. And the nuanced definition is this: to go beyond the bounds. To go beyond the boundaries. To go beyond the stakes, if you will. It is to go where you ought not to go ahead of where one should go. How many of you are familiar with the phrase, to overrun your headlights? Right? You know what that means, right? To overrun your headlights means that your headlights only show you so far ahead of your vehicle. And if you drive too fast, then something coming into your sight, into your headlights, you don't have enough time to respond to it. You're going too fast. So you're overrunning your headlights. You're going too fast. That's the idea here. It's running beyond where you ought to go too fast, to respond to things entering into your vision. This nuanced sense of going beyond the bounds is exactly the deception that Satan brought to Eve. It's exactly the deception that Satan brought to Eve. He tempted her to go beyond the boundaries, to go beyond the bounds, to go beyond where she was supposed to go. Right? He tempted her to eat from the tree, and that would grant her abilities that she didn't have. Remember, he told her, he says, if you eat from the tree, you will know the difference. You will know good and evil, right? You'll be like God, knowing good and evil. And she found that to be attractive. Oh, I want that. But it's beyond the bounds. It's beyond what God had said she could have. And Satan tempted her to go there, and she did. She found that the tree was pleasant, and she wanted that ability to be like God. He led her beyond where she should have gone. Oh, and of course, Adam went there with her, right? He went with her. In other words, John is using this word to say going someplace where you ought not to go, to exceed the boundaries. In this case, John is clear in verse 9 that it's to go beyond the boundaries of the teaching of Christ. See it? Verse 9, everyone who goes ahead does not abide in the teaching of Christ. So he's clearly saying someone who doesn't stay within the boundaries of what Christ has revealed in his gospel. More specifically, to embrace ideas that are not intrinsic to the gospel revelation. Or quite literally, to embrace that which is heretical or heterodox. To embrace that which is outside of the boundaries of revelation. Simply speaking, it's taking the revelation of God and going too far. Going too far with it. You might say that's an example might be of people who enforce secondary or tertiary interpretations of the word upon others as essential to the faith. In the first century, the Judaizers were exactly that. They came to Galatia after Paul had been there, and they attempted to impose the rules and regulations of Judaism on the Gentiles in that place. They went beyond the bounds of what the gospel demanded, and they attempted to enforce that as a part of their thinking. That's to go beyond the bounds. That is to proago where you ought not to go. So the two definitions, the simple idea of simply going ahead of, combined with the idea of going beyond the bounds, John is making reference then to those who are led away into heresy. Those who take the lead to lead others away from the truths of God. Everyone who goes on ahead is those who are deceived because they fail to watch themselves, because they fail to watch what's going on around them, and they then become leaders of others away from truth. They are deceived. They become the deceivers, leading where God would not have them go. John says such people do not have God. They do not have God. In a literal sense, it means such people do not hold on to that which is revealed by God. That word have is the word echo. It's simply the word to possess. They do not possess the things of God. They do not hold on to the things of God. They don't hold a view consistent with God. The word itself, have, is used in some places in the New Testament as to wear, as in clothing. They don't wear God anymore. They're not wearing the cloak of Christ any longer. They have gone past that point. They have run past that point. They have failed to watch themselves. They have lost track of what has come to them through the gospel. In some cases, they have apostatized, literally. In others, they have become dangerously weakened by what they have believed. I find it fascinating that this word have can mean to wear. Because what happened to Adam as soon as he ate from the tree? He suddenly discovered that he was naked. There's a difference between naked and naked, right? You know that, right? I learned that when I moved to the South. I didn't know that, but I know that now. Naked means you don't have any clothes on. Naked means you're naked and you're up to something. Adam was naked. He was up to something. He failed to wear his role. He failed to wear his role as the one with dominion over all things. God had cloaked him, had clothed him with the authority to take dominion over everything in the world, including the devil. And he failed to wear that cloth, and now he stood there naked. The shame over him was that he had lost that cloak, and he stood there naked, ashamed of his nakedness. So the point of this then in verse 9 is that those who go on ahead are those deceived into going beyond what is true and right. They fail to watch themselves and wind up outside of where God would have them. They find themselves eventually being outside the boundaries of what has been revealed in Christ. You might say that they find themselves standing naked outside of the revelation that God has given. Now, John doesn't just throw that in and then back away. He does give us the second half of the verse, which becomes the more positive side of the equation, because he recognizes that not everyone's going to have this problem. He recognizes that whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. It's the opposite then of the first half. It's those who stay the course, those who remain watchful and diligent, testing what is being brought to them, and they continue to walk the course of love in keeping the commandments, okay? They're mindful people, because that's what we're called to be as believers. We're called to be mindful, watchful, careful, right? We're watching. We're being careful. We're staying the course. And John, interestingly enough, says in the first start that they don't have God in some sort of generic sense, but this specifically says they have the Father and the Son. Okay, see the difference. John says those who go on ahead, they just lose God in some generic sense. But the true believer who stays fast and watches and is careful and walks the path that he's supposed to walk, that person has both the Father and the Son. And I would say that the way I would look at it is John, being Trinitarian like he is throughout all of his writings, puts this in the sense that those who are such hold on to that which is decreed by the Father, obtained by the Son, and, we could imply it here, wrought by the Spirit. They have the electing grace of the Father that has set them aside. They have the redemptive work of the Son that has made them whole. And they have the regenerative work of the Spirit that has brought them to Christ. They have those things. They continue to hold on. Notice the same verb is being used here. Have, echo. They wear the very essence of God. They wear the very essence of the Father and the Son and the Spirit. The Christian, the true Christian that follows that's watchful and follows the path of righteousness, wears the justification of the Father and the redemption of the Son. It's like a cloak that's been given to us. That's even the metaphor that's used in the New Testament. It's like a robe of righteousness that's been given to us. We wear it like a robe. And other people, by the way, other people see this robe, right? What does the person see when they look at you? They don't see your nakedness. What do they see? They see the clothes you're wearing. They see the clothing that you chose from your closet to wear. Poorly or, whatever choices you make, they're all personal. But nonetheless, they're choices. They're the outer garments that we wear. Well, look, as Christians, we're wearing a garment. That garment is the righteousness of Christ. That garment is the justification of the Father, placed lovingly upon us by the Spirit of God who has given us a cloak of righteousness. We're not naked any longer in shame. We're clothed in the very righteousness of Jesus himself. Such people successfully hold on to the salvation wrought by the fullness of the triune God in them. They're watching, they're observing, they're staying the course, and they're wearing the fullness of the triune God. So this verse becomes, to me, a bridge. It becomes the bridge from the reality of deceivers in verse 7 and why we must be watchful in verse 8 to what may happen if we're not careful in verse 9. Leading John then to pull the trigger on the point of this entire letter. Walk the path, a path that you are on, that Christ has given to you. There are going to be deceivers who are going to try to get you off it. There are going to be those who are going to try to confuse you away from it, but don't be confused. Watch yourself. Watch what's going on. Be careful. Be aware. Walk the path in the face of those who would try to deceive you. Because if you don't, this is what's going to happen. And if you do, this is what's going to happen. Which leads him then to say, all right, what do I want you to do? We come then to the imperative of this letter. We come to the imperative of 2 John. Now, you remember I said that indicatives are the truth claims that are made. Three truth claims that I pointed out earlier. The indicatives of the letter are the truth claims upon which the thesis of the letter is built. Love one another. Walk the path. Watch out for the deceivers. They're real. Watch yourself. Those are the truth claims that he puts. But an epistle always then has an imperative. Here's what I want from you. And I've said before that the imperatives are the realities of life that must flow out of Christian truth claims. The radical choices believers are called to make in real life based on what has been revealed to them by God. The imperatives are the kinds of things that the epistle writer assumes must happen in the life of those who believe the truth claims. They're the things that must happen. Okay, so imperatives are not just commands in the simplest sense, right? This is not an apostle just ordering the church to do something. No, that's not really an imperative. It's called an imperative because it's a command, yes, but it's more than just a simple command. It's, if John really just wanted to give a simple command, he would have just written a letter, and at the very beginning of it, he would have said, okay, here's what I want you to do. And I'm an apostle, so do it. Right? But that's not what he does. He builds a case which comes to the mind of those listening at the other end, such that they should, at this point, say, that's what we need to do. So it's not just a set of commands. It's an assumption flowing out of those truth claims. When Jesus Christ, the Son of God, gave his gospel, the truths of those gospels should impact the lives of the people who hear them, because they've been born again by the Spirit in such a way that they will do precisely what he wants them to do. Not because he stands there with a whip and beats us to do them, but rather because he has given us truths that are so powerful that they change our lives, that they literally change the way that we think and act. That's what sets Christianity apart from all other philosophical systems. All other philosophical systems start with the assumption that you will learn a few truths and then here comes the command. But Christianity starts from the fundamental reality of the gospel changes you and you respond accordingly. It doesn't have to be drilled into you. It's something that comes naturally from you as those who've been born again. It's the obvious reactions that should flow out of the life of the believer because he has been radically altered by these truths. In a few weeks, 2 weeks in fact, we're going to celebrate the resurrection of Christ, the seminal event of Christianity. The seminal event of Christianity when the Lord of glory walked alive out of a tomb after having been crucified dead. That is a truth that impacts the existence of human beings. If Jesus did not rise from the dead on that particular Sunday morning 2,000 years ago, his name would be nothing but a footnote in a dusty book on a library shelf somewhere. But what happened? The entire world was changed because he walked out of a tomb. And for century upon century, people like you have been gathering together on Sunday morning worshiping this Christ because he walked out of a tomb. That's a truth claim that had an effect. Changed the world. I mean, we call this 2023, right? Because it's based on his life. We date our entire world based on his life. So John gives an imperative. And here it is. You ready? I want to write this down. Here's the imperative. Remove all deceiving and evil influences from your life. Remove all deceiving and evil influences from your life. I'll rephrase it. Keep all deceiving and evil influences out of your life. Same thing, isn't it? Slightly different, but same thing. Remove them and keep them out of your life. So let's put it back in the case John is using it here. Let's put it in context. If believe in Christ means a man walks a unique path, and if there are deceivers trying to disorient him, and if the believer is aware of deceivers because he's watching for them, then the deceiver must take concrete steps to put the deceivers out and walk the path. Right? Wow. Huh. That's amazing. I would have never thought of that. Would you have? Of course you would have. It's as obvious as the nose on my face, and that's obvious. This command, it's not, I set you up here, okay? This is an obvious command. This is so obvious I shouldn't even have to say it. Unfortunately, I do. So the substance of this then is, if anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked words. Now, all right, let's break that sentence down to see how I got to my thesis or got to my imperative. Anyone who does not bring this teaching, who is that? Who is that? Well, there's a word for such a person. It's actually kind of popular in our day now. It's one we use a lot. Someone who does not bring this teaching, or more specifically, someone who brings a different kind of teaching, right? Because that's the context here. Someone who is deceiving. Okay. What do we call such a person? A person who comes along and wants to change your opinions. What do we call such a person? That would be my guess too. There's a better word. Politician's a good word. But the word that we use today for that is an influencer. An influencer. Did you know that there are people who make a good living doing nothing but influencing you on social media? We call them social media influencers. The people have that as their job description on their resume. A social media influencer. And they make gobs of money, apparently. It's someone who is paid to influence how other people think and act using the tool of social media. Okay, so that's an influencer. Now, in this particular case, when John says anyone who comes to you, he's referring to someone attempting to influence you, someone coming to convince you of this or that in the hope that he can win you over and change your thinking and your behavior. Right? Someone who's come to you does not bring this teaching. Someone who's come to bring you something else. John called him up in verse 7 a deceiver. So we know what kind of person it is. It's a person coming specifically trying to influence you, trying to convince you of something. Now, let me be clear. All human communication is influencing, okay? I am being an influencer right now. That's what I'm doing. I am a paid influencer of Grace Fellowship Baptist Church. And the media that I use is preaching, okay? This is the world in all communication is an attempt to influence. Okay, to persuade is common to human interaction, right? To persuade is common to human action. It's what we do. Yes, politicians attempt to persuade because they want you to get you to vote for them or to believe their policies or whatever. Everybody tries to influence. Preaching is influencing. Convincing you, trying to convince you of what is true and changing your behavior. Now, I wonder if the following sentence is true. I think it is. I'm convinced that social media, what we today call social media, carries the broadest range of influence in human history. Probably it's a fair statement to say that influencing through social media is much broader than any other time in human history. I mean, think about it. You could post something on Instagram, and people on the other side of the world can see it within seconds of you posting it. You could be influencing somebody on the other side of the world, somebody in India or Pakistan or Vietnam that has Instagram and happens to follow you for some reason and could see your posting. And you can influence them from literally halfway around the world. I mean, think about it. In John's day, just exactly how far did influence go? Right? There were no worldwide communication systems out there. How long did it take for this letter to get from John's pen to the elect lady herself? May have taken days or weeks for it even to get there. He writes these things and then gives it to somebody to take it to her wherever she was. It would have taken days. And how long would it have taken for this letter then to influence her and her children and whatever else that means, and then wind up being copied and sent out to others to influence them? That would have taken years. Developing the New Testament, we know, took decades to accomplish. But today, you could take out that trusty iPhone and you can use your thumbs and you can influence somebody on the other side of the world just like that. So we are living in an unprecedented time in that sense. You can literally influence somebody on the other side of the world. In John's day, influencing was door to door. You had to go down to your neighbor's house, knock on the door, get invited in, and sit at their coffee table and try to convince them of something, and all of that took time. But not anymore. Now, I want you to hold on to that point for a second. Because as I said, the point here is that John is warning the elect lady not to let evil, deceiving, Christianity destroying influences into your house. That's what he says. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting even. Now again, in John's day, that would have been the way of influence, right? So they would come to your home, sit down with you, have a conversation, try to influence you, try to change you, try to get you to believe something, right? It's like when the Mormons show up at your front door. What are they trying to do? They're trying to come in. They're trying to influence you. They're trying to come in and convince you that Joseph Smith was a great prophet and that, the Son of God really isn't the Son of God, but just some man that used to live on this planet. It's now God in another planet somewhere. Okay. John is warning the elect lady, don't let them into your house. Now, I'm convinced that into your house is another way of saying into your life. Because that would have been John's reality, right? That would have been the elect lady's reality. Her house. If it's a church, which I believe it was, it would have been into your church and into your homes as a result of that. The same idea. Don't let them into your life. Don't let them into your way of thinking. Don't let them come into your life. In fact, John even goes further and says, don't even give them any greeting. Don't even say hello to them. See how far we're going with this? This is John saying, be careful. Now, in the simplest sense, when he says don't let these into your house, he could be saying avoid letting anything into your house or into your life that might destroy your faith. That's the simplest definition of this phrase, right? It's not hard to understand what John says here, is it? It's really not hard to understand what John says here. In fact, John could be, at this particular moment, thinking of the words of the Lord himself when Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, verses 29 and 30, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. Principle is obvious, isn't it? The principle is obvious. And I would point out something to you. Jesus didn't just say this once. In Matthew's gospel, this is repeated again. Jesus says it here in Matthew 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, but he repeats it again in Matthew 18:9, almost verbatim. You think he thought it was important? When Jesus called his disciples to follow him and gave them the elements of faith, do you think that Jesus thought it to be a secondary matter if you hang on to it? No. Jesus' perspective is, listen, if something comes along which causes you to lose your faith, you must get rid of it, even if it's your right eye or your right hand. Now, let me be clear of something here, okay? Jesus is not advocating some sort of self-mutilation religion, okay? Are we clear here? You understand what I'm saying, right? Right. Okay. Listen to me. He's not suggesting that you should gouge out your eyes and cut your hands off. Even though we do live in a society now that thinks mutilation is a good thing. But the fact is that Jesus is not advocating some sort of self-mutilation. But the metaphorical principle of getting rid of anything that might cause you to stumble from obedience to him is obvious, isn't it? It's obvious. So, it's a simple principle, isn't it? We understand it. In fact, I'd be willing to bet if I went around the room and asked each of you to explain what I just said, you would give me a pretty good description of what I just said. Everything that comes into our lives that deceives us and tries to draw us away from Christ, we need to get rid of. We need to put it out of our lives. All right. It's simple to understand. But it's extraordinarily difficult to do. It's extraordinarily difficult to do. It's one thing to know the principle. Something else entirely to actually do it. All of us would agree with this on theory, right? Yeah, you're right, preacher. Preach it, brother. That's right. Get rid of that stuff from your life that causes you to be deceived. So this leads me to the logical question. What influences have you let into your life? What influences have you let into your life? What's in your home that's influencing you? What influences your thinking more than anything else in how you view the world? Let me say that again, just for punctuality. What influences you more than anything else in how you view the world? Let me put it back into the stark numbers that I used last week. Remember I said that only 4% of the population holds a biblical worldview? At this point, Barna estimates that roughly 68% of the American population calls themselves a Christian. Okay, put that in big fat quotation marks, all right? Why? If 4% of the total population holds a biblical worldview, and yet only 68% of the population holds to a biblical worldview, that implies that only 2.5% of the people who use the label Christian for themselves actually hold a biblical worldview. Do you realize what I just said? I just said that 98% of the people who walk around in America today and say, "Have a blessed day," hold not to a biblical worldview, but to a secular one. So the natural question that comes is, how in the world did we get here? How did we get to a place where 97% of those who claim to be a Christian don't hold a biblical worldview? How did we get there? Have you ever asked that question? Let me suggest to you it's right here in 2 John 10 and 11. It's right here. What has caused such a great percentage of so-called believers in the West to be influenced away from a biblical worldview to a secular one? What has taken people from a trust in the gospel and dragged them away to something else entirely? What? What? I'll tell you what. The two greatest influencers in human history both arose and became popular in my lifetime. I know, to some of you I'm old, but okay. In my lifetime, the two greatest influencers in human history arose. The first one was described by Neil Postman as amusing ourselves to death. Amusing ourselves to death. And it is a square box that sits on a stand in your living room. Television became popular in the 1960s. Yes, it was invented earlier than that, but it became the center of American household life in the 1960s. And by the 1970s, television became ubiquitous. Everybody has one. Now, we don't even think twice about it, right? You walk into somebody's home, you see that big old 65-inch LED screen sitting right there in the middle of their living room. Guilty. TV. And the internet. The internet came around when I was first started my computer career back in the early 80s. About the midpoint of the 80s, the first internet, the ARCnet, became available and then slowly morphed into the World Wide Web and then eventually became what we call today the internet. Al Gore was busy for a long time getting that working. But these two things, if you narrow the internet down to social media, because I think that's where you have to narrow it down to, because that became the fundamental influencer, that the internet, the vast majority of data passing through the internet is coming from social media, okay? These two influencers became the single greatest tools in the hands of evil influencers in the history of the world. It took only 10 years for this entire population to go from believing that two men marrying was foolish to two men marrying being absolutely normal. Absolutely normal. 10 years. That's never happened in the history of the world. Such a thing was never possible across 2,000 years of time. And in 10 years, this is what happened. We were influenced away from a Christian worldview in just a short period of time. All right. So John says, put out of your life, don't let into your home anything that will influence you away. Don't even greet them. Don't even say hello to such deceivers, to such influences. So the principle is obvious, and we all understand it, don't we? But there's some of you right now that are trying to avoid making eye contact because it's, See, we understand it, but our problem is actually obeying it. Our problem is actually doing it. And the reason why is because we have all been influenced by the world around us, and we like what we have. We like it. We like having instant access to information about other people's lives. Instantly. We like that. We've grown to love that. We've grown to make that a part of our lives. I wonder if I asked, don't raise your hand, but I wonder if I asked how many of you check your Facebook page as one of the very first things that you do, or check Facebook as the very first thing that you do when you get up in the morning. Now, I may be behind the times. I don't even know if it's Facebook anymore. Maybe it's something else. TikTok? Whatever that is. I thought TikTok was a clock, but okay. But hear me. As Christians, we've been influenced by this stuff too, and deeply. How do you think we got to 97% of people not believing in a biblical worldview? Right here we are. We want to believe a reformed faith. We want to believe a reformed set of theology. We want to say, yes, I believe that there's deceivers out there. Yes, the reformed faith is the right view of the world. Yes, we should be people who are consistent with our love of Christ. But I also love my Facebook and my Snapchat and my Instagram and my TikTok and my Twitter and whatever else you're using nowadays. We too struggle with sacrifice and discipline. Yeah, we do. I get it. I get it. I'm right there with you. Yes, I have one of those big screen things in my living room as well. So we're all influenced by these things. So what do we got to do? What is John expecting us to do? Now, don't look at me with a quizzical look on your face, because you know exactly what he's telling us to do, right? If John says to the woman, don't let anything into your home that will drag you away from the teaching of Christ. If anyone comes, what is it you got to do? You got to take inventory. Okay, so now it's time to take inventory. That's what we got to do. We have to step back and ask what we have let into our house, and we must decide before the Lord Jesus Christ what we allow to remain. Okay, look. Let me be clear about something. I'm not standing here and telling you to get rid of Instagram or Facebook. I'm not telling you that. Okay? It's not my job. I'm not in the business of binding your conscience on these matters. Okay? It's not my job. I'm warning you about the realities of them. And all of you know that my warning is true. Not a single one of you disagrees with me. And if you are, then you have your head buried in the sand really deep. We all know it's true. But I'm not here to tell you that you must not use these things, because according to Romans 14, that's not my job. But there is someone who does have that authority over you. There is someone who does have that authority over you. And if you go by his name, then you must go by his commands. We know who we answer to, right? We don't answer to the preacher. You don't answer to me. You don't even answer to each other. You answer to the Lord Jesus Christ that sits upon his throne. And he is the one who sent the Spirit for John to write these words. For us to ignore them is to ignore him. So we must take inventory. It's my place to bring this principle to your heart and exhort you to keep it. And it is about everything that is a part of your life that may disorient you in faith. Everything. Now, John gives us in verse 11 something to follow. For whoever greets him, meaning the person who comes, the deceiver who comes, whoever greets him takes part in his wicked deeds. John ups the ante there, doesn't he? See it? John ups the ante. There's no neutral ground here. There's no neutral ground here. There's no room for us to say, well, you know, I'm just going to be very careful about who I look at and who I follow and so forth. And yeah, but see, he goes further to say whoever greets him takes part in his wicked deeds. You're actually participating in it, he says. Again, greeting. The word, by the way, that's used here is the word chairo, charo, chair with an O. Chair, greeting, to rejoice, to be glad, to be happy to see someone. Meet somebody at the door. Hey, it's good to see you. Okay, that's greeting. Greeting him at the door. Come on in. We're glad you're here. Have some coffee. That's the idea. John says if you greet him at the door like that, cheerfully, it means that you've allowed someone to come into your home who's a deceiver and you've welcomed him in gladly. The metaphorical definition then is an idea coming into your life that you embrace. An idea that comes along that you embrace. Oh, yes, I believe that to be true. Yeah, I saw that meme on Facebook. Oh, lovely. I love it. That's me. I believe that. Even though the meme says something anti-Christian and it's fundamental, even though it's couched in Christian language. How many memes have you seen like that, right? But you still believe it. Oh, I love this. Let me pass it on to somebody else. Share it with somebody else. John says, if you greet such a person, you are taking part in his wicked deeds. Association with those who promote what is heretical or heterodox is dangerous. Deadly is probably a better word. Deadly. Thus, the Christian is to purge all evil influences from his life, period. Your hand is your evil influence, cut it off. Your eye is your evil influence, gouge it out. Do what it takes to get rid of everything that will deceitfully draw you away from Christ. Watch yourself, he says. What are you doing? What are you looking at? What are you following? What are you believing? What ideas are coming across your mind that are causing you to lose your faith, that are championing things that are not consistent with the gospel of Jesus Christ? I don't know how to say that any differently than that, because that's what John says. So in the church, we as elders, we have a responsibility to hold all heterodoxy out of the church. That ain't easy, but it's what we got to do. In the home, fathers, parents, you have the responsibility to manage everything that influences your household. To Christ, it's all or nothing. To Christ, it's all or nothing. When Jesus told his disciples in Matthew 16:24 that you are to take up your cross daily and follow after him, that is not seen by Christ as a liberty to indulge in whatever fantasies are out there. It's a call to radical obedience, which demands that we allow absolutely nothing else to serve as our master. Christianity is not a call to 1 foot in the world, 1 foot in the church. Christianity is a call to a life given to Christ in utter submission to him as our Lord and as our master. Jesus turned to those hypocrites that were following him around, claiming to be his followers, even though they were not. And he looked them in the eye and he said in Luke 6, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you. And then he adds to that, you remember, in Matthew 7 when he says, there will be many who will call me Lord, Lord. And I will say, I never knew you. John's imperative could not be more clear. I'm not sure I've been, but I know he's clear. Everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, meaning the good teaching of Christ, doesn't bring this, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting. Whoever greets him takes part in his wicked works. John is short and to the point, but his point is obvious. What will we do now that we've heard this? What will we do?